On an unusually still evening in early August 1914, as the sky over London turned from pale gold to deep blue, Sir Edward Grey stood quietly at his window in the Foreign Office. Outside, the street lamps flickered on, one by one, casting long shadows over the cobblestones. Carriages rolled by, couples strolled. The city looked calm, almost untouched by the tension building across the channel. And then Grey said, almost to himself, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." It sounded like the reflection of a tired statesman at the end of a long day. But in that moment, he felt something deeper, a heaviness in the air, a sense that the world he had known was slipping away. To most people, Europe in 1914 felt unstoppable. Cities buzzed with life, electric lights glowed in cafes, factories hummed. Trains connected distant capitals with astonishing speed. There was pride in progress, in science, in industry, in empire. Young men believed they were living in the most advanced age history had ever seen. Yet beneath that confidence was unease. Workers protested for fair wages. Ethnic groups within sprawling empires whispered about independence. Old monarchies sensed that loyalty was thinning. The surface glittered underneath. Pressure was building. Governments told their citizens they were protecting peace. But protection looked like more ships, more rifles, more artillery. Germany built a navy powerful enough to rival Britain's. Britain responded with even larger warships. France strengthened its army. Russia called up soldiers by the millions, convinced numbers would be its shield. Each nation repeated the same reassurance: we prepare so that war will never come. But when neighbors prepare at the same time, fear grows quietly in the background. And fear is rarely patient. In Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II felt both powerful and vulnerable. He believed Germany deserved its place in the sun, yet he worried constantly about being surrounded by rivals. In Russia, Tsar Nicholas II saw himself as protector of Slavic peoples beyond his borders. In France, memories of past defeat still stung. In Britain, leaders struggled to balance diplomacy with imperial responsibility. None of them thought they were villains. Each believed they were defending their nation's honor. But together, they had built a system so tightly wound that if one nation stumbled, the rest would be dragged forward with it, whether they wished to move or not. It was like a room filled with dry wood, carefully stacked, waiting. All it needed was a single spark. And that spark would come not from London or Berlin, but from the Balkans, a region often dismissed by Western Europe as distant and volatile. Few realized how deeply resentment and hope were tangled there. Fewer still understood how one young man's decision could ignite something no emperor could control. Even as Grey spoke of fading lamps, telegrams were flying between royal courts. Military plans, detailed down to railway schedules, were ready to activate at a moment's notice. Once mobilization began, stopping it would mean chaos. Leaders believed they were managing a crisis through careful calculation. What they failed to see was how little room for hesitation their own plans allowed. In cities across Europe, crowds gathered in cafes discussing rumors of conflict. Some laughed it off, others felt a quiet dread they couldn't explain. Many young men imagined adventure, uniforms, the romance of serving their country. Few imagined trenches carved into earth, or families waiting years for sons who would never return. Few imagined that the bright optimism of 1914 would dissolve into mud, wire, and smoke. If you feel the weight of that moment, the fragile calm before everything breaks, consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps more people discover stories like this, told not just as dates and battles, but as human turning points that shape the world we live in. Because somewhere in the Balkans, in a city called Sarajevo, a motorcade was being planned. A route was being mapped, a crowd would gather. And history was about to take a wrong turn. At the center of Europe stood an empire that looked grand and unshakable on paper, but inside it was tired. Austria-Hungary was a mosaic of languages, religions, and identities. In its cities, church bells rang in different traditions. Street signs shifted from German to Hungarian to Slavic dialects. Markets buzzed with color and contradiction. It was beautiful in its diversity and fragile because of it. Many communities felt unheard. Many believed power rested too far away in Vienna. On the surface, imperial ceremonies projected confidence. Beneath them, there was resentment that had been quietly growing for years, and it only needed a moment to burst. The man who would soon inherit this uneasy empire was Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was not especially charming. He could be stiff, blunt, even cold. Many at court disliked him, but he was not foolish. He sensed that if Austria-Hungary did not adapt, it would eventually collapse under its own weight. He considered reforms that would give greater political voice to Slavic populations within the empire. Not out of sentiment, but out of realism, he wanted stability. He wanted survival. Yet even the idea of change unsettled powerful figures who preferred the old structure exactly as it was. In trying to strengthen the empire, he made enemies within it. To the south, Serbia carried a different dream. Many Serbs believed that all Slavic people in the Balkans should live under one united nation. For them, Austria-Hungary was not a stabilizing force, it was an occupier. Pride, memory, and longing mixed together. In cafes and student circles, ideas were whispered passionately, secret groups formed in shadowed rooms. Young men convinced themselves that history could be pushed forward by courage alone. Backing Serbia stood Russia, which saw itself as protector of Slavic peoples. And backing Austria-Hungary stood Germany, determined not to let its ally weaken. What was meant to be a network of security had become something more rigid, like dominoes standing too close together. In Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II felt both confident and anxious. He believed Germany deserved its place at the forefront of Europe. Yet he feared Russia's growing strength and France's alliances. In Vienna, many officials were tired of what they saw as Serbian defiance. They spoke of discipline, of respect, of restoring authority. Few paused to consider how fragile the balance already was. Each capital told itself the same reassuring story: firm action would prevent greater trouble. But sometimes firmness only narrows the path forward until there is no path left at all. And then there were the young men in Sarajevo. Among them was Gavrilo Princip. He was 19 years old, thin, quiet, often sickly. He did not look like someone who could change history. But he believed fiercely in the idea of liberation. He believed sacrifice could awaken a sleeping people. He and his friends were not generals. They were students with pistols tucked under their jackets, fueled by idealism and anger. They convinced themselves that one dramatic act could shake an empire. They did not think about the millions who might be caught in the aftershock. June 28, 1914, carried heavy symbolism, the anniversary of Serbia's defeat at Kosovo centuries earlier. For Serbian nationalists, it was a day of memory and mourning. For the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was meant to be just another official visit. When Franz Ferdinand agreed to travel to Sarajevo that day, it was a gesture of calm authority. He would inspect troops, attend receptions, smile for the crowds. It was supposed to show that the empire remained confident and in control. The route of his motorcade was published in advance. Along that route, several young conspirators took their positions. Some carried bombs, others carried pistols. They were nervous, they were determined, and none of them could truly grasp what would happen if they succeeded. Because sometimes history does not hinge on armies. Sometimes it waits for a single car to slow down. The morning of June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo felt almost ordinary. The sun rose over the red-tiled rooftops, birds chirped along the river, and the city's narrow streets were already alive with the hum of daily life, shopkeepers opening their stalls, children chasing each other along cobblestones, and the scent of fresh bread drifting from bakeries. It was a quiet Sunday morning, yet beneath the familiar rhythm of the city, a tension rippled. Young men carried pistols beneath their jackets, hearts pounding with purpose and fear. They were about to change history, and in that same moment, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were stepping off a train, unaware that this ordinary day would soon become extraordinary and tragic. The motorcade moved slowly along Sarajevo's sunlit streets, the Archduke waving to the crowd, Sophie smiling beside him in her white dress and wide-brimmed hat. Uniformed soldiers lined the route, flags fluttered in the breeze. Yet hidden in the cheering crowd, several young conspirators waited. One of them, gripped by nerves, hesitated and did nothing. Another hurled a bomb at the Archduke's car. It bounced off, exploding behind the vehicle and injuring officers and bystanders. Smoke swirled, people screamed, chaos flickered across the sunny street. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie, remarkably, were unharmed. Despite the morning's terror, Franz Ferdinand insisted on continuing. He was a man of duty, stubborn and meticulous, determined not to let fear dictate his actions. Some advisors pleaded for him to leave the city immediately. He refused. Every step he took, every handshake, was meant to show that the empire remained in control, yet fate had other plans. Across the city, Gavrilo Princip wandered near a cafe, frustrated, thinking the opportunity had slipped away. He was only 19, small, nervous, and pale, yet he carried a determination that belied his youth. And then, in a twist that almost seems like destiny, the Archduke's driver made a wrong turn. The car slowed, it stalled, and there, directly in front of Princip, history paused for a breath. Princip stepped forward, he raised his pistol. 2 shots cracked through the quiet morning. Sophie fell first. Franz Ferdinand clutched his chest, whispering to his wife to stay alive for their children. Panic erupted, bystanders screamed, police surged, and Princip was quickly subdued. He had believed he was striking for freedom, but no one yet understood that these 2 bullets would ripple outward, toppling empires and pulling the entire continent into war. The news raced to Vienna, Berlin, St. Petersburg, Paris, and London. At first, many assumed it could be contained, just a tragic act, a crisis of protocol, but grief in Vienna hardened into fury. Germany offered Austria-Hungary unconditional support, the infamous blank check. Russia stirred on Serbia's behalf. France and Britain began to prepare, each government convinced itself that it was acting cautiously. Each thought it still controlled events. And yet, by the end of that day, it was clear, control was an illusion. If you feel the weight of these human moments, a young man's trembling hands, a couple's fleeting smiles, and the quiet missteps that steer history, consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps more people experience these stories, told not as mere events, but as deeply human turning points. Because soon, trains would begin to roll, soldiers would march, and Europe would move into a war no one truly foresaw, a war that would change everything. The news from Sarajevo hit Europe like a sudden winter frost, sharp, chilling, impossible to ignore. In Vienna, grief turned quickly into anger. Officials whispered urgently in gilded corridors about punishing Serbia, about showing strength, about asserting the empire's authority before any compromise could take root. Every word, every telegram, every meeting was measured, but beneath the careful calculations lay fear, pride, and uncertainty. Far away in Berlin, Kaiser Wilhelm II assured Austria-Hungary that Germany would stand firmly by its ally. He believed war, if it came, would be swift and decisive, a surgical strike that would protect the empire and leave Germany dominant. But no one realized just how uncontrollable the momentum they were unleashing had become. Russia began moving troops towards Serbia. Germany responded in kind. Once trains started carrying tens of thousands of men, the schedules could not be stopped. Platforms filled with soldiers, mothers clutching handkerchiefs, fathers tipping hats in quiet whirring. Soldiers waved at the crowds, thinking they would return home by Christmas. Streets buzzed with patriotic cheers, yet beneath the celebrations, a silent dread lingered, an intuition that the world they knew was already slipping away. France prepared for war, Britain hesitated, then readied its own forces. Across Europe, governments moved in what seemed like a precise, orderly rhythm, yet it was a dance without rehearsal, where one misstep could mean disaster for everyone. Young men believed they were chasing honor and glory. Mothers knew, in the quiet moments, that something terrible was approaching. The machinery of war was alive now, rolling forward, unstoppable. Ordinary lives were about to be consumed in ways no one could yet imagine. In London, Sir Edward Grey watched helplessly, knowing the truth: the lamps of Europe were going out. He had sensed it, and now it was happening. Across the continent, those soft lights that had symbolized hope, progress, and security were fading. This was not just a political crisis. It was a human one: fathers, sons, lovers, neighbors, all about to be swept into a tide far greater than themselves. Within weeks, a regional quarrel became a continental war. Empires toppled: Austria-Hungary, Germany, Russia. Revolutions erupted, borders were redrawn. A generation that had expected peace was now swallowed by mud, barbed wire, and the relentless roar of artillery. Bright, carefree summers of youth vanished. Young men who had laughed in city squares found themselves marching into a nightmare they could never have imagined. Families waited in vain, letters stopped coming. Hope was measured in inches of trench mud. And yet, even in this devastation, the human cost brings the history alive. The bullets in Sarajevo did not merely kill two people, they ignited fear, pride, and misjudgment that touched millions. People who had been strangers to the conspirators, strangers to emperors, became intertwined in events they could never control. Every village, every street, every home was affected in ways the planners in Vienna or Berlin could never foresee. For those who lived through it, the lamps truly went out. Millions who had loved, laughed, and dreamed that summer would never see them lit again. And history, as always, reminds us that even careful plans can unravel, that human choices, pride, fear, impatience, can ripple outward and reshape the world in ways unimaginable. The summer of 1914 is remembered not just for the assassination, the armies, or the treaties, but for the people who lived it, the young and the old, the hopeful and the terrified, and how the smallest act of a single person could tilt the entire world off balance.